often wonder, what is this reading doing here? Why do we hear this edgy, apocalyptic, slightly creepy story about God coming to us like a thief in the night? I mean, really, what kind of awful metaphor is that? Why, just as the season begins its festival of sentimentality, with the pageants and the glittering white lights, and we are lulled into complacency by the tryptophan-induced turkey coma and the relentless barrage of Christmas commercials, why now do we hear Jesus and not just Santa telling us we better watch out? But if we've been paying attention to Jesus and his surprising teachings all year, this one really shouldn't be unexpected. It's so like him to upend our comfort with something edgy. And so it really shouldn't surprise us that Advent, for all of its glowing candles and soft purple and beautiful music, is an edgy and even slightly anxious season. Advent is about waiting, yes, and it is about hopeful anticipation, but it is also about something else, for what we are waiting for is nothing less than shocking. We are waiting for God to show up. Right here, right now, in the middle of our lives. We are waiting for a new day to dawn, a new world to be revealed, a time when God breaks in and turns the tables on our quiet, ordinary existence. Is that good news? Maybe, maybe not. For to get ready for this event, we are going to have to come to terms with what our quiet, ordinary lives actually look like. Are they God ready? This morning, for the first time, we sang, O come, Emmanuel, which means God with us. O come, God, be with us. But as lovely as that sounds, this whole God with us business is pretty much a good news, bad news scenario at best. The good news is that God cares enough about us to come and join us in our human messiness. That's an act of radical love and self-giving on God's part. The bad news is that God's presence will shine a light in this world and in our hearts, and all that messy stuff, the stuff we hide under the carpet or shove into the closet or pretend doesn't exist, that stuff will be revealed. All the heartache, all the brokenness, all the chaos. So this passage from Matthew makes us uneasy, and it should make us uneasy because it asks us to take an honest look at the state of the world and the state of ourselves and asks us, are we ready for God? Of course, most of us would rather not think about that question. We'd much rather focus on the little story so long ago told of the little baby who came into a tiny corner of the world one night to a chorus of angels singing. We'd rather think of that story than about the bigger story of the bigger world that remains in constant need of God's entrance and re-entrance. The world whose story of injustice and violence and fear continues to cry out for a new day, every day, not just on December 25th. In that world, babies are still born into poverty, and brutal empires still threaten vulnerable people, and angels are nowhere to be found. And we most certainly would rather not think about the troubling world that we often carry within us, the inside one that mirrors the outside one, an internal world full of anger and loneliness and despair. A world that also cries out for God's love to enter, to make the broken places within us whole. For those two stories, the inside one and the outside one, are really about the same thing. They are about how much we need God. Oh come, Emmanuel. This interconnectedness between the cosmic and the personal, the big world and the little world, is at the heart of Jesus' words this morning. Just before this passage that Matthew wrote begins, Matthew has Jesus describing this re-entry of God with a grand and terrifying description of the sun fading away and the moon darkening and the stars falling from the sky and earthquakes rumbling across the land. And then for the part that John read for us, Jesus moves into some rather more ordinary metaphors of wedding parties and farmers in fields and women grinding grain. One moment, he says, everything is normal. The world is just chugging along according to schedule. And in the next moment, all will be changed. When God enters the world, Jesus tells us, nothing stays the same. Everything from the cosmic to the common will be turned upside down. And then he asks us the question, are we ready for that? This kind of ancient writing is known as apocalyptic writing. And it can sound rather strange to our modern ears. It's dramatic and cataclysmic and frightening. Scholars tell us that it is the literature of the oppressed, written by people whose world is crashing down on them by forces beyond their control. And so those dramatic metaphors and images can be quite cathartic for people in a time of fear. But their real power lies in the hope that they offer. Apocalyptic writing tells us that no matter how bad things are now, things are going to change, and they're going to change dramatically. God is on the way. Hang on. And yet the metaphors that Jesus uses in this passage, in those metaphors, his audience doesn't seem oppressed so much as sleepy. He isn't really imploring them to hang on, but rather to wake up. And for me, this more subtle wake-up call hits home. And I think that may be true for many of us. I'm not saying that we don't feel the oppression of forces beyond our control, but I think that for most of us, the tragedy of our lives is not that we live on the edge of catastrophe, but that we have fallen asleep. We've been lulled into unconsciousness, not because things are so great and so comfortable, but because we have come to believe that the things that trouble us will never change. We look at the frustrating gridlock of our political system and we say, it'll never change. We look at the widening gap between the rich and the poor and we say, it'll never change. We look at the melting of ice caps and the warming of our oceans and the fierce natural disasters being unleashed and we say, it'll never change. The constant barrage of devastation and disappointment has left us cynical and too often indifferent. It's too much to process. It leaves us feeling so helpless, and so we tune it out, and we give up trying, and we focus instead on numbing the uncomfortable reality with another plate of stuffing or another trip to the mall. It is into this numbness that Jesus tells us, watch out, stay awake, things will change. God is coming, and you never know when she will show up. Despite all the end times folks who swear they know exactly when Jesus will return, right down to the minute, Jesus himself says he doesn't know. And he pretty much says he doesn't care. He just promises that someday he will. I think that Jesus doesn't worry about his return timetable because the when doesn't really matter. After all, if we knew when he was coming, we just mark our calendars and live as carelessly and foolishly as we always do and just get our act together in the nick of time, maybe the night before. And that's not how Jesus wants us to live. He wants us to live as if he might show up any time, any day, any place. He's counting on the element of surprise. He wants us to be on the lookout and to be ready, not just the night before, but every day that we're alive. In everything that we say and we do, Jesus wants us to be thinking that God may be waiting for us just around the next corner. And yet it is that waiting that is the hard part. It's figuring out how we are to live in the present that is our Advent challenge. Advent is all about the present moment. It draws on the stories of the past, and it celebrates the promise of the future, but it's all about the right now. can be very hard to live with. Gurus and yogis and Zen masters might be able to do that, but not us. All that patience, all that letting go of the outcome, very hard for most of us. But here's a little bit of good news. Advent waiting is not a passive thing. It's not about inaction. It's about acting in ways that count. It's about making changes that make us more aware of God's presence, not less. Which means it's about changing in ways that invite the world in, not in ways that tune it out. Theologian David Bartlett offers this thought. Yes, one day Jesus may appear in the clouds, coming as suddenly as a thief in the night. But before that, as Matthew tells us, Jesus will appear just around the corner suddenly, like a hungry person, or a homeless person, or someone sick or imprisoned. While we are waiting for the big cosmic reveal, we can be watching for the little personal revelations of Jesus that are as close to us as our neighbors in need. Instead of reaching for that second helping of stuffing, we can take a bag of groceries to the food pantry. Instead of buying yet another unnecessary sweater on our Christmas list, we can bring a trunk full of coats to the homeless shelter. Instead of watching another rerun of It's a Wonderful Life, we can pay attention to the news of suffering people around the world and make a donation to help them and offer a prayer and keep them in our hearts and minds so that they are not forgotten in the blur of sentimental holiday entertainment. We can find time to be aware of God and find ways to make room for God. We can light candles in the growing darkness to remind ourselves that the darkness cannot and will not be overcome. As we prepare our hearts so that when God shows up and turn on the lights, we know that we have done our best to make this dark and hurting world just a little bit brighter. For God is coming, my friends. Stay awake. Be ready. Amen.